Welcome to Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and I am so thrilled to be welcoming back to the podcast for round two, the CEO of Hope Gas, Morgan O'Brien. Morgan, thank you for coming back to Leadership Rediscovered.
Yeah, no, I so enjoyed the first two versions of this. Yes. I said, I have to come back for a third, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So
of course.
For those of you who have not listened yet or watched, episodes 48 and 49 of Leadership Rediscovered is a good two-parter. But episodes 48, 49 on Leadership Rediscovered were our first round of conversations. Yep. And I think started laying the framework of what you were doing in your role with Hope Gas. And now I'm excited because you recently celebrated the 1-year anniversary of, how do you say it? Is it a reforming? Because I know the Hope name existed at one point, but really you kind of brought it back a year ago.
Yeah, I don't know if I really framed it other than it, it's just another chapter in a long history of this company, right?
Yeah. Very cool. All right. So past the 1 year, for people who haven't listened to the previous episodes, they will. But in the event that they haven't yet, could you just talk a little bit about the significance of that milestone in the company's journey and where things are right now?
Yeah. So the company is actually coming up on its 125th anniversary of being an existing here in West Virginia.
Wow.
And over those 125 years, they've had all kind of different ownerships, like a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And the most recent ownership was Dominion Resources, who we bought the company from. And they had actually rebranded the company during their ownership to Dominion Energy West Virginia.
Okay.
And so for, more than a handful of years, the name Hope Gas sort of left the West Virginia face, right? There were the bills that went out said Dominion Energy West Virginia. The trucks people saw on the road said Dominion Energy West Virginia. The company uniforms, the CEO with his swag was sitting there with Dominion Energy West Virginia, right? And so for us, a big part of what we were trying to do is establish the West Virginia-based company. And so bringing back the name just obviously was a natural part of that. And that for us, that was one, we knew our employees would react favorably to it, right? Because that's their roots, that's the roots of the company. I think what we were all taken back by were the community's reaction to it. So we've got nothing but incredible positive reinforcement along the way of how good it is for Hope Gas to be back, how good it is for it to be, here in West Virginia, focused on West Virginia, based in West Virginia, all those things, right? So that's the starting point of the bringing Hope Gas back when it's really never left.
Right. But and I love the name. There's so much goodness that you can do with bringing hope back, period, to so many people in West Virginia.
No, it's by far, for so many different reasons, probably one of the best company names, and particularly with what we think our mission's really focused on. And that is, I hate to say it that simple, but we're trying to bring hope, more hope to West Virginia, not create hope, but bring more. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so last year you kind of kicked things off with your epic, was it a tailgate at the West Virginia Pitt game?
Yeah, and I think
the backyard brawl.
Yeah, so we had we closed on August 31st at midnight, so we became the owners at 12:01, and September 1st was the bringing back of the backyard brawl between West Virginia and Pitt. And so it felt like marrying those two events just made natural sense. The logistics of it were incredible, and we talked about it last time, but we were able to bring 500, Hope Gas, West Virginia employees up to Pittsburgh for that. We had a big tailgate party. And actually, I can remember like the excitement in everybody's faces, like the idea that we're creating this West Virginia company. Like we walked into the stadium together, 500 of us with Hope Gas on our shirts.
That's so cool.
We got inside the stadium. We saw Hope Gas on the field. Got to watch a video that I got to put on there to talk about our goal and our vision of what we were going to be doing here in West Virginia. And it was just like a really exciting literally a kickoff.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, it couldn't have gone any better to start.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's the starting point. Okay. Now that was one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, especially at this time was just to talk about what this year's been like, and if you'd be willing to share any key milestones or key learnings that you've had from the year. I think it would just be great to bring it to the present time now from that point.
Yeah, and so like everybody who comes to somewhere, you start telling your story and put a few stakes in the ground, right? This is who we're going to be, and these are the things we're going to do. And I don't know that everybody sits there and measures, here's the stake you put in the ground and here's what you did. But I think because the year's been so successful, we're actually reminding people of those stakes, right? So to see how much we've exceeded those stakes. And so one of the first commitments we made is that we were going to bring 100 jobs to Hope Gas here in West Virginia. We surpassed the 100 early on in the year.
Wow.
And are really focused around 200 jobs by the end of this calendar year.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And what we say we're most proud about is those are family sustaining jobs, right? Because there's all kinds of jobs, as everybody knows, in this economy.
Yes.
And so we always say it's a family sustaining job that a person can support their family.
A livable wage.
Exactly. All those things.
Wow.
So that's a stake that we put in the ground, and one that, we think is, really, really important. And we feel really proud of that, that we're going to be exceeding that.
Yeah, well, and that's big too, because I feel like a lot of times, especially when new companies come to an area or they plan for some kind of expansion, a lot of times they will put somewhat of a promise out there on how many jobs they estimate coming to the area. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of times it doesn't always hit the mark. Yeah. And so to exceed it.
Doubling, just in case you're wondering. So,
Exactly.
I use all round numbers. I don't know if they're exact or not, but they're round numbers. And, and so that was one of the most important stakes that we put in the ground. And what we talked about was creating a headquarters here in West Virginia. And one of the first things we did was found a place to call our headquarters, right? And with a lot of, I'll call it, really, this is where I found out how much people valued, the Hope Gas name. When we talked about putting our name up on a headquarters building, one of the first places I thought of, because I'd read the story, was when, Mylan Pharmaceutical left Morgantown. They sold that building, that whole facility, to West Virginia and the medical center up there for $1 to really try to replicate, those jobs that were basically leaving West Virginia. And I kept thinking, one, I want to be part of that story, right? This is the new West Virginia bringing new jobs into the state. So that was exciting for us to, I'll say, land that as our headquarters. And then, we also were fortunate, I think, because I'll just say it, not to get political, but we have an incredible governor here in West Virginia who gets, I'll say, creating jobs. He truly gets it, and it's one of the things at his core. And so we had a ribbon cutting ceremony this year to celebrate that headquarters, sitting up there on Chestnut Ridge Road. And he came to it, right? And he spoke and was, as he always speaks, from the heart, and talks about all the wonderful things that we've been doing in this 1 year, which obviously we'll talk about here. But to have his sort of confirmation, he was literally the first person I met with when we were buying Hope Gas. And there were a whole bunch of things he said to me that inspired me even more. But the one thing he said, which I'll never forget, and I think he even said it at the ribbon cutting, is, West Virginia is going to be the last state to turn its back on natural gas, right? And to hear that from a governor unequivocally is when you're just spending, $700 million to buy a gas company. It feels pretty good. Yeah, it feels pretty good.
You need to have that support.
So those are two good bookends for me. One is that, we committed to him the things that we talked about, including the jobs. And I think he was here to celebrate that not only did we meet that commitment, but obviously exceeding it. And he gets, how important energy is to the economic development and all the things that we're going to talk about. So
yeah, that's amazing. Well, and if I recall correctly, not only did you create job opportunities, more full-time type opportunities, but you also adjusted some of your contractor work as well to be able to prioritize, if I'm saying that correctly, West Virginia-based firms or contractors versus outside of West Virginia.
Yeah, and for us, it's sort of like it sounds a little bold or maybe arrogant to say it, but we want to show others how to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the definition of creating a West Virginia-based company? Well, the first part was the jobs we created within the company. And that feels, okay, so now your CEO's here, all your administration's here, the decision makers are here in West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
We added the call center, so when customers call somebody, they have somebody from West Virginia answering the phone.
Nice.
We have somebody who, good chance, is familiar with the neighborhood that you're in, and I'll just say it's one of the secrets of West Virginia is that people care about each other in a true way.
Yes.
And so to take that quality and to have them be the face of our company when people are calling was incredibly valuable. And so all of that was like, okay, that's what a West Virginia-based company does. But more than that, one of the first things we did was we said, well, what does it mean to have decisions made here in West Virginia as opposed to Richmond, Virginia under Dominion Resources? And it was actually Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania under Consolidated Natural Gas. So all these different owners over the years. Yeah. This is the first time that all the decisions really are being made here in West Virginia. So we had we're hiring a bunch of people, and our people need trucks. So we had to go buy trucks. And we said, rather than, entering into a national contract with General Motors because they wouldn't have any interest in us, we went to the car dealers here in West Virginia, and we started buying literally trucks off the lot.
Wow.
And what it was funny, a lot of new people, right? So we're hiring people, and our procurement person was a new person to the company, and she just went around looking for trucks, and she'd see, white pickup trucks in a car dealer, and she'd go in and she'd show them, I'm with Hope Gas. And she's like, I want to buy every white truck you have here. Right. And the car dealer obviously got excited. Yeah. And she's like, but I don't know how to pay for it. I don't know how to process any of this. How do we do this? And the car dealers were like, we don't care.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
We know who Hope Gas is, right? This goes back to the branding. And by the way, this isn't a one-time order, right? This is a relationship that you're building. And by the way, if anything ever happens to that truck, have your folks come down here to the car dealership and we'll prioritize it, right? Because we know this will be an important relationship. And so that was and it was funny. So the reception that she got and I'll call it the support that came with that, you can't put a price tag on it, right? And so that was the starting point. And then, we have what I call a fairly significant and actually a big pipe replacement project that got started here prior to us. And prior to, I'll say, our ownership, all those, again, decisions being made in Richmond, Virginia, they were hiring pipeline companies from national firms, right? Yes. And so a person would bid on a contract, and like 1 week they'd be in, Clarksburg, West Virginia, replacing a pipe. And then the next week they could be in Cleveland, Ohio, replacing a pipe for Dominion. And then maybe down in Raleigh, North Carolina, replacing a pipeline. So it was a lot of national contractors. And, again, highly qualified, probably passed all the procurement tests, right?
Yeah.
But we changed that. We said, I wasn't even sure how to introduce ourselves to people. And so my roots are, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, big labor town. My owners manage labor pension funds. I said, I'm going to reach out to labor leaders here in West Virginia. And so when we were doing the renovation at Morgantown, going back into hiring people in West Virginia, we sat down with the building trades and said, I want to hire people in West Virginia, right? And those guys look at you like, are you crazy? Like,
is this a trick?
we're chasing jobs. No one's ever chased us to hire us, right? So now you got somebody coming in the door saying, I want to hire as many as your members as I can. I have electricians and carpenters and all the technical stuff that needed done at Morgantown. We hired from West Virginia labor halls. And I said, who are the contractors that hire you guys? How do I get in contact with them? And as you can imagine, they were incredibly helpful. And then we went back to them and said, I don't know who the pipeline construction companies that deal with the West Virginia laborers here. Can you introduce me to them? And so we arranged a meeting down in Jane Lew, which is our operating center. And I'd say about 7 or 8 West Virginia-based pipeline construction companies showed up. And the story was we wanted to educate them on the projects we were having and how to participate in RFPs and just connect them with our folks and say, listen, if you have questions, here are the people. And so, I told the story that I just went through about Hope and how we're back and how we're focusing on hiring West Virginia employees here. But also that what does it mean to be a West Virginia-based company? Well, hiring West Virginia companies, right?
Yes.
And so of the 8, only 2 of them had ever done work at Hope, right? And if you think of it, West Virginia has basically 2 gas utilities, us and Mountaineer Gas. Mm-hmm. And to think that you're a pipeline construction company, you've never done work for the hometown utility.
Right.
It's like it actually scratched your head. Well, and how can it be is the decisions were made in Richmond, Virginia, right? And so right away, we were just, saying, hey, that's awesome, right? Mm-hmm. So, here's where the projects are and here's where the locations are. So we go through this whole process and I stop and I say, are there any questions from you guys, right? Because I typically do a lot of talking, so I always have to remind myself to ask if they have questions. And so the first contractor, he said, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. And I'm like, okay, let's see what this is, right? And he said, and I'm learning a lot about West Virginia, and it's all things that I love now and appreciate. I always joke that when you get a group of people who don't necessarily know each other from West Virginia, they all sort of brag on that their town is the smallest, their high school was the smallest.
What stoplight?
And I know I went from the smallest town, and then somebody tries to outdo them. So this guy starts off with his line that, I'm probably from the smallest town in West Virginia here, went to the smallest high school. And then we got into a little bit of a debate as to what's the definition of small. And but then what he said was, which was like, I was wishing I had my video on. He said, when I grew up here in West Virginia, Morgan, my mother told me there are 3 jobs that you can get in West Virginia. You can go work in the coal mines, you can work at the steel plant, which was near where his town was, or you can go work at Hope Gas. He said, those are the 3 good jobs you have. This guy didn't listen to his mother, like probably a few sons have done. He went to WVU, got his degree, right? And then he decided to start his own construction company, right? And he said, so I was driving here this morning, Morgan, and my mother will say, the steel mills went away, the coal mining jobs have gone away. And he said, I'll just be frank, Hope Gas went away, right? Mm-hmm. In theory, right?
In name, yeah.
And he said, I called her to tell her I'm on my way to Hope Gas. He said, it's back in West Virginia. And guess what? You're right. It's creating jobs here in West Virginia, and I'm hoping to get some work out of them, right? And honestly, I was sitting there like, that says it all, right?
Yes.
And then folks throughout so we got into this next set of discussions where each of the 8 were talking about family members that worked at Hope Gas, people they knew that were over the 125-year history, right? And how connected it was to each of them. And so as we started down that path, right, I spend a lot of time, as we talked about in our last 2 episodes, that I go out in the field and I reconcile with people, right? So the first question is, how's this working, right? We got new people replacing pipe. And this is, again, this goes back to the quality and sort of the humbleness, but I'll call it the work ethic of people in West Virginia that I'm still learning, right? And so our guys in the field say, Morgan, if I have an issue with my truck, right, I know the guy where we got the truck from, and he's going to fix it for me. And, I used to have to go into car dealers and say, this was done on a GMC contract out of Richmond, Virginia, and, go look it up and figure out whether it's warranted or not. He said, this is West Virginia. Like, if they sold us a truck and there's an issue, these guys are going to fix it, right? They're not going to look up my file, right? Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so that's a good thing. There's value in what we're doing here, not just supporting the local economy, who happen to be our customers, right? Which is not a bad thing in itself. But then we got into the pipeline construction, and it was funny. So one of the folks said to me was, first of all, like when we deal with these national contractors, they don't always do it the way we want it, right? And he said, and we'll tell them, like, hey, this isn't the way we want it. We do it differently here. And they'll be like, I'll be in Ohio next week. Like, I got to get out of here, get this done. Yeah. There's no ownership, right?
No, and no connection.
No connection. And one of the folks said to me that he used to work for a national pipeline construction company. And he said, I'll tell you what my job interview was. And I said, okay. He said, I told them I was from West Virginia and I went to, technical school and learned how to be a welder. And the guy said to him, everybody from West Virginia works hard, they're honest, and you're hired. He said, so Morgan, the fact that you're hiring people from West Virginia who have good skill sets, like this makes perfect sense to us, right? Like it's the quality of the people, right?
Yes.
And it's that connection, that the ownership of the work and just, all the values there. So, again, and I keep saying, we're not changing the world, right? Maybe, but it's a way of, sort of just showing West Virginia companies that, you have to be purposeful, right? Because, I'm sitting here today with this sweater on, right? And so everything we do, we say, how do we connect to West Virginia? As opposed to, it's so easy, right? With the internet and Amazon and create, I'll call it quick, efficient solutions, right? And it's like, no, let's go find a company that does this in West Virginia, right?
Yeah.
And so like all the embroidery's done here in West Virginia. I mean, I'm sure these shirts are made in Japan, like everything,
right?
But eventually they'll be made in West Virginia, right? But so it's just, it causes us, right? And people see it, that like that's who we want to be, right? And and so it's, again, it's sometimes it may not be the easiest, it may not be the way others have trained us to do things. And again, like we call each other out on it, which is really exciting, is, hey, where did we get that?
Yeah.
Did we think about who the providers are locally?
Yes.
And it's again, I just think for us as a company, the internal, call it our culture.
Yes.
It creates this awareness, and we point it out, like, oh, by the way, we used to do it this way, now we do it this way. Right. And it's it makes people feel good. Like we're, the ultimate vision is that, I said from the beginning, we want to create a company that becomes so valuable to our customers that they can't imagine a world without us.
Yes.
Right. That's the ultimate vision of what you're trying to build here. And so, as you support things and as you support their businesses and as they see you, is supporting their customers' businesses, right? All that, right?
Yeah.
You say, okay, you're making yourself more valuable here each step along the way.
Exactly. And I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because there's so much. Oh, I could go in so many directions on that alone, just because I feel like it's a really important model. And I appreciate you going into the detail of how you've actually structured it, because you have been really intentional in terms of how you do business. It's not just about locating your business here. Then from there, I mean, you can do that, and that's great. And I'm grateful when companies do come to West Virginia, but you can take it so many steps further. And I don't think people realize that. I mean, I grew up outside of Dayton, Ohio, which a lot of times when people think about automotive industry, they think about Detroit, which certainly was big for automotive, but the Dayton area also had a huge GM presence as well. And so when the automotive crisis happened and you saw all these big manufacturers moving out of the United States and just limiting their production overall, it wasn't just about the GM plant that closed. It was a seatbelt manufacturer that was nearby that ended up having to close. There was, this other company over here that also closed. And so, that's the negative or the downside effect of what happens sometimes when a company closes. But thinking about the more positive flip side of that is, hey, if I'm opening a business, it's not just about employing people, which alone is amazing, because you're creating livable wages for people to have families here to stay in West Virginia, which is huge. But you're also creating so many opportunities for other businesses to be successful. And then there's this whole flywheel effect that comes from that as well. And then when people see that name, they take pride in Hope Gas. The employees are happy and proud to wear the shirts and the hats, and this is where I work, or this is where my parents work, or whatever the case may be. And it builds so much community and so much goodwill within the community too, to keep it all local.
And I'll just be also a little frank that I like talking about it. And I like talking about it with other business leaders to make them question how they do things, right? It's like, and I would never call anybody out. But I all the time when I'm with, a president of a company or a CEO or just even a private owner, I talk about, how we've changed and how it's not easy, right?
No.
And
it might not always be the cheapest business decision either.
It won't be the cheapest, right, necessarily. But if you sit there, so part of our premise of our business model is that, if we have people in West Virginia serving people in West Virginia, again, it may not be the cheapest model. I can offshore a call center incredibly cheap. But at the end of the day, the quality of the work that you do and ultimately the cost of your total service, right? When you think about it, getting information correctly from a customer, getting all the connections with what we actually do and eliminating sort of all the inefficiencies of I'll call it being cheaper, right?
Yes.
In the end, I mean, I've convinced myself that you save that money and becoming a lot more efficient. Plus, which you can never value too much, is what does that customer think of you, right?
For sure.
Having somebody who takes the time, helps you through your process, cares about what you're doing, and understands our company as opposed to somebody who's taking information and you call back and you're speaking to somebody else, right?
Well, and you could literally be talking to your neighbor, maybe.
Right.
It's someone that
absolutely
lives near you, lives in your same town or the next town over.
Yeah.
And that makes such a difference because getting back to what you said, if you're trying to build a culture and you're trying to get people excited about the mission, if they don't have that connection, if it's just this is another job to me, or I'm going to be in another state next week, they just don't feel that identity or that sense of connection or community at all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I mean, what you're doing, I think, allows people to not only feel that connection, but to take pride and to really take more of the ownership, like you said, about the work that they are doing and the impact that they can have.
Yeah. No, there's no questions, and as you know, like your expertise in leadership, when you plant the seeds with people, like you said, this is who we want to be, and like I don't sit here today and say I know the 25 things we should change. I might know 3, right? Yeah. And then you tell people these are the 3 we changed, and here are all the benefits, and here's what we did. And right away, it's like, well, here's 4 more ideas, right? And then you have 4 more ideas, and the next person has 4 more ideas. And again, you start now putting that story together, and it's all of a sudden you got 25 ideas when you started with 3.
Right.
And to me, that's how you create culture. That's how you create ownership.
Absolutely.
And to say, after 12 months, like I look around my organization and what people are doing, and they're running with this and running with pride. Like that's the part I truly, I can feel it. And it's, these aren't Morgan O'Brien's ideas. They're not my leadership team's ideas. These are people that just, some of this they're doing on their own. Yeah. And you just sit there and say, every small step we take, it's like who we want to be. And you always want to reconcile everything you do to say, hey, was that consistent with what we want to be, right? The big things are easier because you can stare at them. The little ones are the ones you don't even think about, but when you see them, it's like, oh my gosh, that was such a great idea. And I literally was, before I was coming down here, I was talking to my assistant, and she's like, hey, we're doing this project, and I know the people doing it, they're just learning West Virginia, and like, here are some things you ought to think about. And I was just like, absolutely, like. Send them, tell them those are my ideas if you want. Yeah. But own those, like having those people wanting to help with that, I'll call it that mission of, because you feel good about it, right? And that's part of it.
And people want to contribute and they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They want to, every day I talk to people, I want to make a difference. I want to have an impact. I want to change the world. And if you give that, they're just waiting to be unleashed to do it, right?
No question.
Instead of, we're going to hire really good people and then we're going to control every aspect of how they think and when they work and how they work.
Exactly.
And all of that.
It's like, and why did you hire good people?
Exactly. Why don't you just use, robot for that instead? But and I think what's so great too, and one of the things that I really respect about you, and I think is unique about you, is that you are incredibly visionary. You're strategic. You have big ideas.
I don't know about that.
You're willing to rock the boat or challenge the status quo, which I think is huge. But but the way you do it is not, I had this big idea and now everyone has to just do what I want to do because I'm the CEO and I can't.
Right. Yeah,
you can.
Right.
But I feel like your style oftentimes is, hey, I'm kind of thinking directionally about going here, but not prescribing the solution for everyone, allowing the team to take that ownership and think about, okay, we see the vision of where he's going.
Right.
And here's our thoughts on that.
Yeah, and the way I would describe that is that I'm not the smartest guy you ever met. Like, you've had lots of really smart people sit here. Like, I'm smart enough to know I don't have all these answers. And the reason I hired all these really good people is they have those answers, right? So to me, the whole process would fail with just one bold idea with a guy who has no idea how to do it, right? It's a great bold idea when you hire a bunch of people that know how to do it.
Exactly.
And they actually create what you're talking about. And then, they feel empowered to have their great ideas, right? And it goes to the, I know 3 things that we should change, and everybody in the room has 3 ideas, and now you've got 25 ideas, right? It's the same thing here. The part you worry about, and I'll just say, because you don't ever share with people what you worry about, right? Because you're part of a job as a leader is to make people feel safe and confident.
Yeah, you don't. If you seem nervous or worried about the future, obviously they're going to follow suit.
Yeah, and it's really funny because, like, people will say to people that work for me, nothing upsets this guy. Like, this guy doesn't get upset. And I'm like, if you saw me driving home at night, like, I'm upset, I'm worried, all those things, right? It just,
that's because you care.
Yeah, you care. And but the where I was going with it is just that, the whole I'll say the idea that we had a lot of, I'll call it, I think, ambitious goals this first year. And a lot of it were things I saw, and I know how, I'll call it, opportunities present themselves in life. You don't get to pick when opportunities come to you, right? Some people think you do. But I think one of my experiences is sometimes an opportunity comes to you and you either take it or you pass on it, and it may never come back to you. And and for me, the idea that we're busy now because we have these things we're focusing on when opportunities came to us. And so, and for me, it was like, this is what we talked about. So these opportunities fit right in, right? Remember how we talked, we were going to do this, right? But the thing you do worry about is there were a lot of opportunities that came our way this first 12 months. And you do worry about the ability to a new team. And our team, if I described it, it's there's a whole army of people that were here at Hope working for Dominion, West Virginia, that came out of their shells and the spotlight was shined on them, and they got opportunities to step up. So you got new leaders stepping up, and even the leaders you had here, you're basically sort of unleashing them, which is scary and exciting, right? As you know, and to say, like, you're part of this, and we got to take ownership. But by the way, like, nothing's off the table here. Like, we're going to talk about everything and question everything. And then you have a group of people that you're hiring who have no relationship with the company. Some of them actually weren't even from West Virginia, like, are coming here for the opportunities. And so you've got this, okay, I hear this guy talk about the state and why we're helping it. But you put all those ingredients together, right, as a leader, and you just keep saying to me, this is going to work. Like, we got all the right people here. And you get in your car and say, I hope it's going to work, right? And I hope I'm not I'm not sort of putting too much stress on a new system, right? A new team that's building as you go. And honestly, that's probably was my biggest fear. And so what's really, really exciting as I sit here today is the team has nailed it. Like, they, in every instance, not only, did they do what we wanted to see happen, it's like they've made it better. Every step along the way. And so, like, it's scary for them right now because I'm sitting there saying we can double this. Like, we did
we just keep going.
We keep going, right? Because they have the capacity to do more. And again, sitting here a year ago, I would sit there and go to sleep at night saying, okay, you know, because you realize it. You could see the potential in people, but you never know how long it takes to realize that potential.
Yeah, and sometimes you see potential in others they don't see in themselves, and that's a challenge too.
And that's a journey, right?
Yes.
To bring that out of them, to make them feel comfortable. But it felt like this was, I don't know what the right analogy is, where like started, you know, fruit ripening on a tree or whatever. You just started watching all this, I call it ripening, that was happening with business leaders and taking the ball and running with it. And then the people beneath them taking the ball and running with it. And, you know, I'm not saying there was never, you know, a mistake in the road or a bump in anything we did. But we accomplished so much, and it felt exactly like you drew it up, which starting
this
out.
This is exactly how we envisioned this in our mind.
but I feel like, and this is my message to this group is that, you know, this is it's a great team. It's just really hitting its stride. We've done a lot of, you know, in 12 months, right? Because that's the other thing you remind yourself. I think of businesses and they say, you know, one or two things are the most things you can focus on in that period of time. I mean, to be honest, we had at least a half a dozen really big things that were going on in that time frame. And in every one of those instances, you know, I when I first started sharing with people, and every time we announced something that we were doing, I would get from employees saying, "Is this too much?" Right? And I would say, "Of course it's not. We have all this amazing people." But I'd sit there and say, "Is it too much?" Right?
Well, because like a small town, everyone's definition of too much is different. I think
absolutely, yeah. So, you know, like probably of all the things we did, and we can talk about any one of them, probably the most amazing thing that I feel so proud about, and it's not me, it's the team, is that this is a really good team. And they're working really well together. And there's, as you know, everything's a journey. You can always get better. There's issues that you need to work through. But as far as like executing and doing important things and working together and really owning things, which is at the end of the day, you think, you know, this could take a while before people feel like they own things. But honestly, 12 months later, like these people own it. And they're running with it. Yeah.
I'm curious just to hear your perspective on what you attribute that team's success to. The fact that they are accomplishing so much, working, is that just coincidence, or I feel like it's not? But I'd love to hear your perspective on what you attribute that success to.
So, you know, and I look at sort of, and this is probably wrong, but I look at the groups of people that I have. So I start with the biggest group, which is people that were here working for the company and were part of a really big organization, but never felt, in fact, they felt the opposite. They felt like they were the hair of the tail of the dog in that organization, and probably told that at some point, right? And had all kind of ideas along the way that just weren't important, right? And so you have that, and, you know, and they did great work. They came, you know, the employees were safe, customers were good reliability. They they executed all
checked
the things.
All those boxes.
And very well trained and all those good things. You know, and then you have like this crazy guy who comes in and sort of shakes everybody up and says, like, we're going to do things. And a lot of the things were the things that were your ideas that you were told no. And so part of my job is to walk around and hear all those ideas and to tell you something other than no, right? And to create that. And it started literally at the grassroots, where I literally would go into shops and I say, okay, we want to have more customers, right? In West Virginia, what business doesn't want more customers? And, you know, and they'd say, well, you know, we brought these 3 opportunities and we were told no. And how do you reconcile that? And I'm like, well, first of all, if you brought me those 3 ideas, they would have all been yeses, right? And so we needed to figure this out. And I said, so our challenge now is how do we go back to those people who we told no and tell them yes, right? And they'd be like, well, you know, I think I can do this, and right, yada, yada. And so you start, and then part of it is just like, I don't know, it's like you shine a little sunshine on people, and all of a sudden they're working on their tans, right? It's like, you know.
I love that saying.
Right. So it was, you know, every place you went, it was like, Morgan, I got ideas, right? And because they saw you actually did
listening.
And so there, I think, I just say it this way, that like, this is a much, much broader question, right? But I feel like there's parts of corporate America that just squelch people, right?
Yes.
And it becomes a job,
yes,
and not, where I sit there and I tell people this every day, and I think they think, okay, he would say this, like, if you don't feel like you're doing something of value, like, why are you coming here? I mean, obviously it's to get a paycheck to pay your bills and feed your family and that, right?
But there's more to it.
Much more than that, right? And so I think there's this, okay, like we can actually, I want to call it pent up years of being told no, or they stopped asking even the questions, right? Because, that's what happens in big organizations, right? People don't want to
they don't want the answers.
Right, and they don't even want you asking the questions, right?
Exactly. That's just more work to deal with.
And so there's this incredibly valuable group of people who, when you just say, it's okay, like, we want to do things, we want to do more. And to make sure that they hear it, and it's not just words, but then you actually follow it, right? And so we started doing acquisitions here in West Virginia. We bought People's West Virginia Gas Utility. We bought a gathering system down here that was more pipe to help producers, all the things that utilities should be doing. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, we're doing things finally here, and it's in West Virginia as opposed to other places, right? Which was under the Dominion ownership. And I think it was like they saw some bigger things happening that said, hey, like he said it and we're doing it, right? And so now these, I'll call it, all the ideas that we had are real. And again, it's, so that's sort of like, and that's the biggest group of employees I have. And it's the ones that, to me, that will create the roots of our sustainability, right? Because these are people that care about the company, care about the customers. They're here, their roots are deep here. And now, like, they feel differently about what I don't want to say their jobs are, but their purpose for why they come to work, right, has completely changed in a positive way. And, and the next step of that, always is how do you then support the people beneath you, right? How do you empower them? Now you got to let go what we gave you. Right?
Yes.
It's the chain reaction.
Well, you're modeling for everyone. Okay, here's how, this is the behavior. This is what we do here. And how do you keep carrying that forward? Because I think, just to underscore a few things that you said, number one, you're a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for, but you are humble. And it does take a lot of humility, I think, from the most senior leader in the company to say, I am not going to stand up here and assume that my ideas are the best ideas or the only ideas or the right ideas. I want to hear from the people, and I genuinely want to hear. So that's huge. And quite frankly, when you bring up other organizations, corporate America, et cetera, I feel like there's an arrogance a lot of times of, we're the ones running this company. They don't understand the strategy. It's this whole like us versus them scenario. You're all working for the same company. And oh, by the way, that person that's in the field, they are doing the work. They have incredible intel about your customers and the things that are broken. And I mean, you want the dirt on what's going on. You talk to the frontline people.
No question.
They know the real story, because by the time it makes it to the C-suite, it's been filtered and edited. And they're getting like a tenth of the real story.
White by the time it gets there, right?
Yeah, and you're like, oh, everything's great, because we talked to so-and-so. You're not getting the real story there. So, I mean, I think it takes a tremendous amount of humility to and it's great demonstration, but then you're also building trust by following through. And I think that's another huge miss for people, is that they'll come in, they say things, they make promises. It doesn't happen for whatever reason. They don't explain why it doesn't happen, because sometimes there are valid reasons why, but they don't really ever come back and explain why. And then you've got a bunch of people sitting around, great, here we go again.
And so the other part of it is, so that now I've got a group of people who have no history with the company that are stepping in here, right? So, and it's funny, right? So if I hire you off the street and you're well qualified and you're a bright person and all those good things, and right away you want to impress people, right? So you want to be the person, I got the answers. Ask me a question, I'll answer any question. And you're sitting there saying, well, I appreciate that, but I actually think you need to be asking questions as well, right? You need to be the listener, not just me. And so part of like and again, you got to be purposeful, as you know, like you never assume anything's happening, right?
Yeah.
So that you have to be purposeful in what you do. And so the good news is, like, my purpose in listening to people is that I really needed to learn, right? It wasn't, I'm doing this to be polite. I'm not doing this because
feel good exercise.
It's like, I actually need to learn.
Yeah.
And I talk regularly with particularly my folks who are new to the company, how much I learned from listening to people. I'll say, did you know this? This is what I learned out here. And actually, when I talk about the 12 months journey, a lot of it is I learned so much, right? From just, I had premonitions or preconceived ideas that said, here's what West Virginia's like. Here's what the people here are like. And a lot of it was incredibly positive, which people would be surprised at, right? But, you don't invest $700 million in the state if you don't think positive about it. I keep reminding them of that.
Yes.
But, it's this incredibly quiet humbleness, right? That just, it's absolutely like a core quality of people from West Virginia.
Yeah.
The work ethic, right? Of just, that they work hard. And the part that, honestly, I tell it to them all the time. I say, it is unique that people that grew up here care deeply about this state, right?
Yes.
I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and honestly, I can honestly say it's nowhere close. It's a fraction of the people would say I care about Pennsylvania. I don't know. But people here, it doesn't matter where I'm at.
Yeah.
I mean, whether I'm talking to a professor at WVU, whether I'm in Madison, West Virginia, talking to somebody who was working their farm that night, like they truly, it's in their heart, right? They care about it.
Yes.
And I'm building a company where I want people to care about the state, right? But they're born that way, right? And the part that I'll also say that I've learned immensely from the people here. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, right? And there were really, really strong environmental advocates, right? And I would describe those people that most of them live in an urban setting who probably have never stepped foot on call it a farmland or a stream or a mountaintop. And they preach to other people about how they should be doing what they're doing, right? I was joking the other day. I was literally in downtown Pittsburgh sitting in a big Yukon truck, right? And I had a guy knock on my window and said, shut your truck off. You're heating the whole world. And why don't you trade it in on a bike, right? And I'm like, buddy, if you knew what I did for a living, my goal is to heat the whole world. So like, it's okay, But seriously, like there's this, I'll call it people that have declared themselves environmentalists, right? Yeah. And I sit there and I talk to our people and, they talk about the farms and their family and how they've been passed down to generations.
Multi-generations, yeah.
And they care deeply about that land.
Yes.
And they care deeply about that stream that they fished with their grandfather.
Yes.
And they care deeply about the mountains and the things that they spend their weekends doing with their kids and their family, right? And I say to them, like, at your heart, you are a true environmentalist, right? Like you, and it's you were taught that as a kid. This wasn't Hope Gas that said, "Hey, we drove for gas, we put pipes in the ground, all the things the company did over the years." And by the way, we need to be careful of the land. It's like the people that work here, like when they were 6 years old, they knew that stream was something that they were going to take care of.
Absolutely.
And that farmland was something they weren't going to,
no, I mean, they live and die by that land.
Yeah. And they hunt on the weekends with their kids, and the woods are important. And I'm sitting there saying, you guys, the substance of what you are, and you women, right, are true environmentalists. And the people that are knocking on the doors in Pittsburgh saying, go get a bike, like they don't know anything. And I'm not even sure I shouldn't say this. They don't get it. Right. And so I talk to our team about like I've learned that like that these I would never describe people that grew up here as environmentalists, but it's like it's a reason the state's so pretty. Right?
I have never heard someone talk about it that way, but now that you say that, you're right. I mean, these are not people who are trying to savage and destroy land. I mean, again, this is their livelihood. A farmer, their livelihood is based off of that land. So they are caretakers.
And I want to say it's almost like a piece of their family, like that stream where they fish, right? They care about it. Like it's not. And so I sit there and say, if with that in your heart, right, and you come to work and put pipes in the ground and am I worried that, we do something that spoils land or do something? Absolutely. But I know my employees care about that.
Yes.
Like it's not a corporate order that says, and by the way, here are the 3 things you have to do. Yeah. I mean, I think if I just sent them out on their own, they'd sit there and say, we can't mess with that stream. Like that's important. Or we can't,
there's cattle on that property over there.
and all those things, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, not that we don't have environmental training and all the other things, but it's like it's a core of how people are. And honestly, now it's caused me to rethink the other side of that equation, that all those people who all they want to do is talk about it. It's like,
but what are you doing to actually make the difference?
Right.
And do you really understand what you're talking about and what you're protesting or preaching about?
And honestly, like nobody... There's people who probably see the term environmentalist as a negative, right? Because it's some radical who's protesting extreme, somewhere.
Yeah.
And I sit there and say, I think it's somebody who really cares about, leaving to their kids and their grandkids the world a better place, right? Or at least as good as it is today, but most likely it's better, right? And if you have a company full of people that like that's an important quality in them, and you're in the energy business, like. I sit there and say that's amazing, right? Like that's not a nice coincidence. That's like companies would spend lots and lots of money to get their people to be truly passionate about being clean with the environment, safe with what they do, thoughtful, like to actually think about things. And so it's like those are, I'll just say, like some of the qualities, like I learn it and I'm like, this is who we are. And, learning to tell your story, right? So instead of, being defensive that we're, in the natural gas business, it's like, we're in the natural gas business, but who would you want to heat your home than somebody who cares about the land, the stream, the air, like truly cares about
theirs.
It's
they
theirs.
Live in it.
And they want it there for their grandkids. And they want it there for the generations just like their grandfather did and their father did, right? I mean, it's like, to me, it's like why wouldn't you want us to be those people sitting there, right?
Yeah. And that's amazing too, because I think about just, you can make decisions and you can do things in your business based on regulations and like, well, we have to do it this way because of this regulation or how it says this or that, versus doing the right thing because you care and you pay attention to what really matters and what's important, and making decisions by that too. Not ignoring the regulations, but not just living by that alone and using that as a guiding post.
And so I've always turned those conversations back to school, right? Because we all went to school, right? So I always tell them those regulations are C students. Like if you are doing everything in the regulation, you are a C student.
Yes.
You're average, right?
Minimum
because
compliance.
You are complying with everything. But if you do more, right, you can become a B student. And ultimately we all want to be A students, right? So you want to exceed expectations, right? So people will say to me, well, here's what the regulations say. And I say, that's the minimum, right? So absolutely, we're going to always comply with regulations. But like nowhere does it say you can't do more. And they're all like, well, the regulations don't say you can do more, right? I mean, I actually get those questions, right? And why would we do more, right? And I always say, because we want to be more than average in everything that we do. And if you keep saying, so you want to be a C student? Like I never wanted to be a C. I mean, there were times I was a C student, but we won't go there.
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose, right? It wasn't from desire or aspirations. And it's even funnier because like as I've started in that 12 months developing relationships with really important people to our business. And I've honestly developed what I call a personal relationship with people who regulate our business here in West Virginia. And I have a lot of those conversations, like, because, you know, when you question why we do things, right? And I always go back to them and say, well, those are the minimums, right? I could always do more. I could always help customers more. I could always, and everyone's reaction is, of course, like, why wouldn't you?
I look at you like you're nuts.
Right. And then you say, well, okay, here's how I interpret that, right? So just so you know, right? And you know, in those kinds of conversations, and because we're highly regulated, to me, I don't ever want people to be surprised. So I constantly am dropping seeds, saying, I just want you to know what we're thinking about, and your reaction is going to be, this is different, right?
Yeah.
So the ultimate was the West Virginia and a particular company here were in litigation for like the last 5 years on an issue here, right?
Whoa.
And it's funny, and so I was talking to the chairperson of the commission, and, you know, she listens to me, and, you know, it's funny, and the last thing you want to do is call somebody out. And she's like, well, you know, if you really want to do something important, Morgan, you go solve this issue, which has been tied up in courts for 5 years. And I'm like, okay, I'll go solve it, right? And so same idea. I put a team of our folks together and said, hey, if we wanted to solve this issue, what would it look like, right?
Yeah.
And so our team builds on it, right? And so then, long story short, we announced we're buying this troubled system, right? This is a system that was built 100 years ago that took production from shallow wells and moved it to market. And over the years, people who were near those pipelines started connecting to it. And sort of 100 years later, there's 5,000 customers on this pipe that was built not to serve those customers, but to move gas, right? And now all those wells are coming to end of life. And what do you do with 5,000 people who depend on it, right?
Yikes.
And so you get a bunch, and I don't know what the answer is, right? So I sit there and say, but I want to solve it, right?
Yeah.
So I get a bunch of smart people in a room, and all of a sudden you got more ideas than you can imagine. And so fast forward just a few months, right? We're meeting with the commission to say, okay, we're going to bump into your roles, right? And by the way, with the goal that we're going to keep all these people warm this winter, right? So at the end of the day, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
But here are a bunch of roles that we're going to bump into, and at the end of the day, I'm going to keep those people warm. So like, you can put me in jail, we can, but the reality is, right? Because you know everybody's on the same page on these things.
Yeah.
Having those discussions, right, are just like, you know, incredibly valuable, right?
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, how do we solve these problems? Because you can't let rules stand in the way of what everybody agrees is right, you know? And so, and what, again, so it's the same approach. The person who's in charge of like safety at West Virginia, I'm like, you need to help me. Yeah. Like, I want these people to be safe. I want everything to be safe. But there's all these rules, and I don't know how to get around those rules. And so help us think about that, all right? And all of a sudden, they become your advocates, right? So the people you're most afraid of, you know, and the reality is, right, because I get everyone together and say, we all want the same thing at the end of the day. Right. So if that's our goal, like, let's not forget that's our goal. And then there's all these rules. And a lot of the rules don't come from West Virginia. They could be federal rules. They could be, you know, that's the field we're in. Yeah. But even there, where you've got, you know, people saying, okay, I want to help solve these problems. And, you know, and so those are conversations you love to have. But then, like, your employees, like, they sit there and they listen to that, right? And it's like, so we can question roles, or we can think about roles differently. And I always say, like, let's figure out what's the most important thing to do. Yeah. And then how to get there. And then figure out what issues do we have in that path, right? Yeah. And how do we deal with it? And we don't need to know. The question I tell people is, I don't need to know the answer to every question. You don't need to know the question. We need to know what the questions are, and how to get the people in the room that can help us think about it, right?
Yes, and the why behind. If there's a regulation in place, what was the spirit of it in the first place? Why was it put in place? And are there other options? Because I think sometimes even the people that are responsible for enforcing the regulations may not agree with the regulations either. And so the fact that I feel like in so many circumstances, you have situations where you could potentially have enemies,
Yeah,
so to speak,
absolutely.
or people who are working against
Yeah,
you, let's
yeah.
say, for a variety of reasons. But instead, I feel like you reach your hand across the table and say, listen,
Yeah.
and you're very open about, you're not trying to sneak around or, you're just real open about, okay, here's what I'm doing.
Right.
Here's my goal.
Right.
And I'd like to collaborate and partner with
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
and like make it much easier and nicer
Yeah,
for everyone
yeah,
instead
yeah.
of fighting you
Yeah.
to get to where I'll ultimately get to anyway.
Yeah. So we started, and again, I would say people outside the state would say to me, West Virginia is a tough place to do business, right? For reasons that don't exist. And honestly, like what I've seen is the complete opposite. It's like once you start showing people what you're doing and that you're really doing it, right? You've got credibility here. There's actually a whole group of people that want to help you, that support it, right? So, and again, I'm always somebody that I can't just say what I'm going to do. I actually have to do it.
Right. That is a very important part of this
just
equation.
like with my employees, right? It's the same on the outside.
Yes.
So he said it, but a lot of people say it, so it doesn't mean anything until he does it. But then once he does it, it's like, okay, maybe this is a different company. And so when the first meeting with the governor, I said to him, I want to help you bring business to West Virginia beyond mine, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, absolutely. That sounds like who
would say no to that?
Yeah, right. and I try to describe to him that, when companies look at where they relocate, right? West Virginia is competing against Pennsylvania. It's competing against Tennessee and Arkansas and every other state, right? And so every state's saying, come to our state, we'll create the jobs here and we'll help you. And I say to him, every state has to be able to put its best assets forward. And, in addition to, I'll call it the incredible, the mountains and the rivers and the natural, I'll call it beauty that West Virginia has, which, by the way, younger people are killing to get to Denver because they have those exact same assets, right? Like, which is a completely different subject. But you also have energy, and like energy when companies come here needs to be part of your conversation.
Right.
And I said to him, like, I would love to be sitting at that table to explain to people how this works, right? And everybody's like, that's so awesome, that's great. So in order to make, again, to take that step, I literally had a business that I knew was looking to relocate and put a production facility in, and I brought them here to West Virginia, right? And they were like, I know you're down there, Morgan, but like, why would I come to West Virginia, right? And I'm like, well, come down here, and I'm going to show you the secret, right? Because it's a secret down here. Yeah. So they came down, and it was funny. They were coming down, they were getting prepared, and what they found out was this is a technology company that the last 3 engineers they hired all graduated from WVU, and that WVU has a really good energy program in the field that they're in, fuel cells. And so they were like, oh, like that might be a reason we come to West Virginia, right? The university's here, right? And then when they were coming down here, they found out that they had done some research years ago with a professor, and it turned out he's now at WVU. He wasn't years ago, but he is now, right? So it was like they were before I got to show them anything. They were like, okay, pieces are starting to come together.
Yeah.
And so then we took them to a location that was a perfect location for them, and there were like 10 other benefits about this location, and they were like, oh my goodness. And they're like, well, can we hire people down here? And so I said to them, I just hired 200 people, right? And these are good people. There's a good work ethic. And so they were like, okay, they're starting checking the boxes. And then long story short, we're probably 2 weeks away from them announcing they're going to build this production facility in West Virginia, right? So, and now like the governor and all his staff but help execute this, right? To their credit, like they are pro jobs, pro investment. And so they've been incredibly helpful. But the other side of that coin is they said, the guy who said, I want to help you is actually bringing businesses here, right? Helping.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes. Following through on the commitments.
Right. And so now it was right after we had that first meeting with this group. One of I'll call it the governor's staff called me and said, hey, we have a company that's this first time meeting in West Virginia. They're touring this part of the country. They want to build a refinery. West Virginia has some of the attributes that they're looking at. Would you come to a dinner? And I'm like, yeah, let me bring my team, some of my team, right? Because I won't know the answer to the questions they ask, right?
Yeah.
So you bring all these smart people. And the conversation starts, and and they're talking about what this project is. And I say to these guys, how important is energy to you? And they're like, oh my God, Morgan, that's the most important aspect of our project. We need to have rich, plentiful, affordable energy to make this project work. And I'm like, well, let me tell you like what we do, right?
Yeah.
West Virginia is one of the largest gas producing states in the country. And they're like, yeah, we know that, right? And so then I talk about like our approach, and I said, listen, you're going to have all these issues to deal with, in building this facility and yada, yada. Like we would come to you, we Hope Gas would come to you with partnerships with producers, with interstate pipelines, energy service companies. We could bring that portfolio together, and you wouldn't have to go figure out who to ask. Like we could bring an entire well thought through solution to you. And these guys were like nobody's talking to us like about that, right? And all of a sudden, the folks around the table are like, "Hey, it probably was a good idea to have these folks at the table, right?" But not really. I mean, I think they were smart enough to see that. But it's to me, it's like, so now, like we're our employees, like we're not only creating all the support for the local business, right? Now we're actually helping bringing business here, and it's this whole vision of like we can help make the state a better place.
Yeah.
And I go back to that sort of the ultimate vision here to say, what could other West Virginia companies do here, right?
Well,
what relationships do you have? What are you doing to bring business here? And by the way, if our ultimate vision is to be really valuable to people here, like that feels like you're creating yourself to be more valuable.
That's
right?
huge, because again, that's another example of doing something even bigger than your own. I mean, it's such a good model for other businesses and other leaders to think about. Okay, let's say I start a business. I'm trying to get this business going. It's a lot of work, and I'm focused, and my head's in the business, and I'm just focused on that business. And thinking about that question, but wait, how could you do more? Not for your own business, but in lifting up everybody else. I was in Huntington, which is a different part of the state from where I live, but I was in Huntington yesterday, and we were just doing an activity at the end of the day where I was asking each person to share something they had learned from the learning event that I was there for. And we throw baseball because, I love baseball.
Absolutely.
And so they threw the ball to me, and they said, well, what did you learn today after being here with us? And I said, well, first of all, it was really cool to be in Huntington because I don't get to come to Huntington very much. And I said, I'm not from Huntington and very passionate about the state. And I said, I can tell. This is a Leadership Huntington group. And I said, I can tell that you all are really committed to making Huntington better.
Yeah.
And it excites me, even though I don't live in Huntington, because if you make Huntington better, you're going to make all of West Virginia better. And that's good for all of us.
Yeah.
So it's the same concept of if I can not just focus on how to make my business better, but if it's I make your business better and this person's business better over here, we're lifting everyone together. And that comes back anyway, I think, in space.
Yeah, and it goes to, Laura, like what I consider, which I didn't know, I learned this year, that the core of nearly every person I've met in West Virginia is they truly care about the state. They care about the people here.
Yes.
So when I'm talking to regulators about safety, and I'm talking to them about, I'll say make it a better place, I know that person in their heart, like they truly care about it. And I'm not just saying this. I know that's not true other places, right? I've dealt with regulators who all they care about is I don't want to be responsible. I don't want problems. Yeah. But like I've embraced this idea, and every time I test it, right? Because you have to test it.
Yes.
It comes back 100%. Like it doesn't matter whether it's a regulator, a customer. It's like if you start say, hey, this isn't about you and it's not about me. I know what the answer is going to be when I'm asking people who grew up here in West Virginia that are part of this community. It's an incredible asset here, and I don't think we talk about it down here very much. But it's unique, which is like I think people sit there and they say that's not unique, and I'm like, Go to other places. It's
Yes.
really unique.
It is. And you're right. If you're from here and you don't really
Yeah.
leave the state a whole lot or ever, you almost take it for granted.
Right.
I think a lot of people take it for granted, but you're right. I mean, I didn't grow up here. I've certainly traveled to states in the world, and that's why I continue to stay in West Virginia. There's
so many secrets.
Special.
There's so many secrets down here, and they're incredibly valuable.
Yes.
And it's like telling that story because part of it starts with there's incredibly humble people here.
Yeah.
And you just sit there like, well, there's times you can't be humble, right? Because we need to talk about all your other qualities, right?
You're right.
Anyway, we're a year into it, and it just feels like everything that we had hoped for, from the team to the opportunities to just being in the right place. It feels like we're 100% or 200%, I say, because we like to double.
Certain maximizer.
We're certain this is everything we'd hope for and more.
That's
right?
amazing. I love that. How about what's next? So what does year 2 hold for you?
It's a lot, right? So it starts with, I sat there and, I'll just quietly say I was quietly worried about could the team handle all the things we did. And they well surpassed any expectations I have. And so, we're looking at doing big things next year. And we got big things that we're talking about. If I told you, I'd have to kill you. So that's just one of those. But I mean, I think it's just really continuing down the journey that we started here. And really, I'll say, just sort of taking it to the next level of, not only, I'll say, going after the low-hanging fruits, but like really helping to drive the state forward that we think is going to be positive. And I got the team that can do it. And I'm just I say it every day. I'm incredibly blessed to have this opportunity. And, we talked at the last meeting, you only sit in a chair for so long.
You're right.
And so everybody, whether it's the administrative assistant, whether it's the security guard at the gate, whether it's the CFO, like we only sit in these chairs, and it's like what you do when you sit in that chair, to me, is how we measure ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is an opportunity for us to do something I think special, and I think people in my company feel that way, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the next 12 months because they're not going to be Morgan O'Brien ideas. They're going to be every employee, the new ones, the old ones, the folks who we're bringing from other places, the ones that we're sort of shining a bigger spotlight on, right?
Yeah.
It just, to see it build is really exciting.
That's amazing. I'm excited. I've had so much fun, and that was why I wanted to bring you back because I love hearing your story.
Awesome.
I love
Thank
hearing
you.
about the journey. Yeah, it's very inspiring.
Yeah.
You are genuine. I checked into you because I was like, this guy seems a little bit too good to be true.
Yeah.
And
he's really not that smart. He's not that smart. He depends on a bunch of smart people.
You are, and I've found people to back up everything that you say.
I pay them well. Yeah, exactly.
You've got a great entourage.
Right.
No. But really, I mean, I think what you're doing is commendable. I think it is so inspiring and such a good model for other people to not just think about how can I best take care of myself or my own business or, but how can I best take care of my employees, the communities that they live and work in, and how do I think bigger about not only how to make this company better, but how do I make the community better, the state better? Yeah. And I would love for that to become contagious and more people thinking that way.
And I think, right, because there's this whole line of thinking that's all nice, right? It's all good.
Yeah.
But unless your business model can sustain itself in that world.
Yeah.
And what we've seen, right, is the value of our business a year later is significantly more than it was a year ago. So my investors are like, run, don't walk. And I'm hopefully raising a group of, call it the next generation leaders who see that like doing all those things that make you feel good and your people feel good actually creates more value than sitting there, staying in the safe lane and doing what you're told and not questioning anything and not taking ownership and all those other things. So my ultimate goal here is to create a sustainable business model that generations and generations, right? It's like we changed the course of a company and made it a sustainable business model that makes money, that creates value for the people that invest in it. And by the way, they feel really good about what the company's doing. So to me, it sort of checks all the boxes, and you and I both know it works.
Yeah.
And building that, I'll call it that group of followers and ambassadors, and really the next generation of leaders. It's not intuitive to people that you can sort of do all those things.
No.
And to me, it's actually, I think, I don't know how to do it any other way. Right. And when you sit and think about it, right?
Yeah, which I think is great, because I think you've been such a positive force for so many people. Because the flip side of it is, I think there are some folks who are tired, who are frustrated, who are worn out, who have seen West Virginia rank at the top of lists that you don't want to be at the top of.
Sure.
And so for someone to come in and say, wait a second, we can do it differently.
Absolutely.
You can, there's so much pride in the state, and you can have that and have even more in being a part of building something really special.
Yeah, no, and it's, it's a state of special people that I don't think ever hear that enough, right? Like a lot of people, right? And I want to be at least part of that voice to say this is a special place. There's special people here, and the potential of those people are immense. And to tell that secret outside the state, so more people want to come here, right? More businesses want to be here, because it is. Again, when I brought the company down here, they're like, "What are the reasons?" Right? And when they left here, they had more reasons than they could even count.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I was sitting here thinking, you bring your own form of special energy. So not only do you help bring the type of energy that Hope Gas brings to West
the natural
Virginia,
gas side of it.
But you are also a force of energy. And I just appreciate you so much coming to talk. I had a whole line of questioning that I was prepared to ask you about that I'd like to save. If you're okay.
Yeah, 100%.
And then, because I can try to maybe hook you into coming back again.
Okay, all
Would you be up for that?
As long as it doesn't get old for the people listening to your show.
No, we got rave reviews.
All right.
Rave reviews, and I know we're going to get rave reviews this time around.
Those people that say good things about me, I told them to make sure they said good reviews. So,
Very good. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be able to tell the story. And your background, your understanding of, I'll call it leadership and vision and values is, just echoes. At least we're trying to emulate what you talk about on a regular basis. Yeah,
thank you. You are the poster child, so that's why I like to have you come on and talk about what you're doing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, that's all the time we have today. Until next time, shine bright, everyone.